Hello, and everybody. Welcome to Too Late for the Gods. I'm Jeffrey Williams, and I'll introduce today's guest in just a moment. Again, I apologize if there's still some audio issues here. Next week, we'll be doing another one of these. It's hopefully with Craig Reed on Bernardo Kastrup and quantum idealism. And I will have a whole different streaming setup so that we will avoid these problems in the future. Please bear with us one more time. Let me introduce my guest. He's also my good friend on Twitter, Ron Gaul. He and I have been going back and forth for over a year now, and I've always had great conversations with him. We're going to talk about an article he wrote about a couple of years ago. It's actually a Marxist materialistic critique of new atheism, and I think it's actually really interesting and worth an in-depth discussion. Ron, would you like to tell us about yourself?
I'm a resident here of North Dakota. I'm been an atheist and a communist of some sort, or a Marxian of some sort, since the age of 13, and gone through a lot of changes there. I have a kid. I'm politically active in my community. I pontificate and rant on the internet quite a bit, and I find a kindred soul in you, Jeffrey, in many ways on many issues. And I wrote this article for a ethics journal, the Northern Plains Ethics Journal, which is the North Dakota State University Philosophy Department journal. That was a little over 2 years ago. And I don't know, I've slowly gotten fed up with new atheism. I had a friend named Chris Stedman who was viciously attacked some years back when he wrote an article called about the toxicity of new atheism, and he had to go dark on the internet for a whole year. He got death threats, and yeah, it was a big deal. And I read his book called Faithiest, which was how an atheist made common cause with religious folks. And anyway, that's another story. That actually would be a topic for maybe another show. But
Sure.
that got me in a critical mode towards new atheism. And then I realized politically it was very different from a left socialist Marxian point of view.
Okay. In your article, I hope I characterized this right, but you announced this as a Marxist materialist critique of new atheism, and you really focus on three different areas: idealism, scientism, and pseudoscience.
Correct.
Before we actually get into it, why don't you tell us what a Marxist materialist approach is?
I usually prefer to say Marxian. There's this
Marxian,
yeah,
sure.
there's this apocryphal story about Marx saying I am not a Marxist, and then a lot of us think, well, we're not Darwinists, we're Darwinian, we believe in Darwin, and that's another story too about Darwin and Marx, which I might bring up later. But Marx's materialist view of history is basically that class struggle is the motive force of history, and class relationships and the economic development of society determines, not in a reductive way, which is an error that some Marxians and communists make, but basically that helps determine the classes in society, and then the struggle between those classes are the motive force of history. And that everything like ideas and churches and ideology and all that are reflective of a material basis of society and a reflective of that class struggle. And there's a tendency to say, well, there's just classes and then there's everything's economically determined or reduced. But basically, Marx looked at it in a fluid way, that classes struggle and ideas spring up from that.
Okay, thanks. Um, your your article, your essay, it goes through three parts. It starts with idealism, and I wanted to take a particular look at that section. But maybe before we get into it, you can tell us what you mean by idealism and how it applies here.
Um, my understanding of idealism and philosophy writ large is that ideas come first, then matter, whereas as material comes first, then ideas. That consciousness is a result of the physical universe. It doesn't create matter. Matter comes from material. In the case of society, idealism is that, well, ideas are the force of history, that good ideas go out and change history and affect the material conditions of society. And that can be true in certain stages of history, but in the long run of history, ideas only come when people have the leisure time to delve into ideas. That when society can produce a social surplus and people have time off, then people have time to write and to pontificate and things like that. So that in a nutshell is how I see it.
Okay, thanks. You start off with, I think, a pretty telling quotes. You first start with Marx, and quote is, religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. Of course, that's one of his most famous bits of writing. And you contrast it with Christopher Hitchens, who where he people of faith are in their different ways planning your and my destruction and the destruction of all hard-won attainments that I have touched upon. Religion poisons everything. Can you tell us why you? I find that a perfect comparison. Tell us what you saw in that and why you could start out with that comparison.
I mean, those metaphors are very telling. As I say in the article, opium is a relief for pain is caused. Religion is a relief for the sickness. And the way that Hitchens characterizes it, religion is the sickness. But religion, I think, historically and for many people individually, is a balm for their pain. And in a modern era, we have other things like all kinds of pop psychology that have taken that role, and other ideas. But to say it's the poison is to give religion and ideas the major responsibility in changing the world and ruining the world, if you will, and causing the problems. And I, like Marx did with Hegel, I want to flip that on its head.
Right. Philosophy, when it's real, like science, when it can't avoid it, communicates in metaphors, and it's always something to pay attention to the metaphors. I'm actually kind of moved by Marx's the quote that we did there, because Marx, I mean, his whole thing was alienation, and we exist suffering because we're alienated. And religion is a balm for that alienation, but it's also a further alienation from our own essence. It's a response to the core problem of our essence, which it's a funny thing. An aside, I have stopped getting into arguments with theists other than paid apologists, most of whom are grifters. I go after them, but I'm always afraid of removing the person's last grasp before they lose it. And I don't want to do that because I know, I mean, yeah, it's a crutch, but for some people, it's an important crutch. And I always, like, the last thing I want to do is deconvert somebody, but I do have no patience at all for people who make their living off of propagating this nonsense, many of whom, like William Lake Craig, know what nonsense they're pouring out there, and I have no hesitation to go after that. But let's talk about opium. Opium is, Marx wanted us to reach a point where the opium is no longer required. It's like German.
Yeah, it's
The German word for poison is Gift, and the German word for opiate is Rauschgift.
Rauschgift. Interesting.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
one of those
the
compound
poison that
nouns.
puts you in a,
Interesting. Well,
Yeah. So in a sense, there's the sense of the poison in the opium. It is a Rauschgift. And the other thing I wanted to maybe explore a little bit here is Marx had one idea of how religions came about. That later on, when you talk about man versus man, in the world of man, and Marx saw religion as primarily a societal and state creation to ameliorate the alienation. Would you agree with that?
yeah, in large part. It
Okay.
eventually took the role as enforcement of state policy. I mean, the church,
Sure.
yeah, in terms of theocracy and all that. But yeah, I agree
And
generally.
that's Marx, just like all of us, it's very difficult to transcend the construct of our own time. We have a hard time doing it. Marx had a hard time doing it. But there's another possible, or at least another element to the creation of religion. And it goes back further than anything Marx would have been thinking about, which is fear. Not alienation, but fear. Um, One of the things I did in my graduate days is I took a number of courses at the Divinity School at the University of Chicago. And I took a close look at ancient Near East religions. And their beginning had to do with man being at the mercy of uncontrollable forces. They didn't understand the world. It was overpowering, and their lives were at stake every single day, and they couldn't control it. And what they did is create gods that were really images of their own fathers, who they could try to please in order to have some sort of protection against floods and droughts and fires and things like that. And it was a fear. It was a way of trying to control what they can't control. It was like an element of coercion. If everybody's survival depends on pleasing these gods, the last thing they can do is have a non-believer in their midst. It puts everybody at risk. So you get rid of non-believers.
Well,
I'm sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Well, Franz de Waal, in that article I linked here, I think you
Yes.
read it, said something similar. And for those who
Right.
don't know, Franz de Waal's a primatologist who philosophizes, and he's criticized by some of the new atheists for being not scientific, but he's very openly philosophizes about humans and primates and morality. And he says that, yeah, when you had a society of more than 200 people where where your reputation wasn't so easily monitored, you needed something like a god to help enforce morality in society. And so larger religions came in, and which is another materialist explanation for religion too. But and so yeah, he has a good accounting of religion in that regard.
Right. Yeah. Oh, DeWall is somebody I have the greatest respect for. I think he's great. Yeah, there is the force of morality, but I think primary to that is the enforcement of belief so that we don't get wiped out by this vengeful God. You know, very, very primitive societies, and the fathers in those societies probably didn't tend toward the gentle side. You didn't want to anger them; they were dangerous, and these are what they were projecting. Freud also, but they were projecting that father figure onto the natural world that they couldn't understand, and you know they were not going to tolerate angering the gods because they'll get wiped out. The flood will come.
And we're talking about maybe pre-class or early class societies too.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
maybe
I think Marx's alienation, while I believe it to be correct, was a later manifestation. North Whitehead had an interesting comment on religions. He said the more that society evolved, the gentler the God became.
did you say the gentler the gods became?
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
You know, I mean, they started out as these just wild, crazy men who would wipe you out in an instant if you angered them, and they end up Jesus Christ, who's turning the other cheek. And he said it happens in a lot of religions. Maybe because the fathers got gentler, I don't know, but there is a common thread among old religions that they mellow and that God becomes gentler over time. I think, you know, where Marx picks it up, we're past the first stage and we're more to the needing the opium stage. The alienation has become greater than fear, is how I look at it.
Yeah, he struggles with a lot of ideas in that period. It's soon after he writes that introduction to his critique of Hegel that in his Paris documents, he really painfully struggles for a concept of human species being, which now I understand is a term he might have gotten from Kant or Hegel got from Kant or something like that. I'm not sure what the German word for species being would be, but he struggles, and you read it and you're going, God, he's like crying out for Darwin to explain to him man the animal, and he's crying out for Nietzsche to explain to him the man is the alien. It's kind of like he was too early, you know. Marx was too early, and then boom, after that, then he starts quoting Smith and Ricardo later on in the documents, and he completely kind of gives up on that alienation thing. You know, but in his critique of Hegel, he has some really great lines in there. I look at it later on; it becomes more German, typical of the German. But there's some lines in there that are just great. That where in order to well, you know, I thought I had it underlined, but I didn't. But he says the abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of men is a demand for their real happiness. The call to abandon their illusions about their condition is a call to abandon a condition that requires illusions. I mean, I love that. That's how he's so good at turning phrases like that.
Right.
And if I had to pick one line in the book, I mean, the opiate of the people one is the most famous, but that one line there, I think, sums it up the best.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, maybe you could give us an overview of the section on idealism and how you argue that idealism would be at the core of new atheism.
everything for them is about ideas. The holy book says this, and so it causes the pain, and the Bible and the Quran and all that, they haven't changed their wording significantly over thousands of years, yet the same wording is supposedly causing this different waves of atrocities to relative enlightenment to periods of humanity. It's like, when I tell them, the wording isn't changing while this is happening. And they say, well, this holy book says that. And there's problems with the hermeneutics and the exegesis and all that with the books. And the books say a lot of bad things. But if they're causing it, if they're so causal, why does the wording stay the same? And that it just irritates me that they don't kind of take that into account. They don't take into account the other societal factors that these religions are springing from, that many of these practices predate Abrahamic religion, and that Christianity makes stuff up. The concept of the Trinity, it's nowhere in the Bible. I mean, religious scholars I talked to said, yeah, good luck finding the Trinity described in the Bible. Or good luck throwing acid in women's faces in the Quran and stuff like, it's just not there. And anyway, it's very frustrating that they have them just go on and on about this. And it's like talking to a child. If you've read my tweets on it.
Yeah, I have. I mean, one possible counter to that, though, although I don't think it's as strong as they think it is that they are themselves, they're self-proclaimed materialists. They stick with what is verifiable, which gets us to the reductionism, which is another problem.
Yeah.
But they would say that their theories, they argue for, comes resolutely out of materialism, out of what's observable, and in by ideas. I think that's the claim that they would make here.
Yeah, there might be materials in the sense that, matter precedes thought. I think in that sense, they're going to be atheistic and materialistic and all that. I just don't. The idea of Marxian materialism is societal. It's historical materialism, as some people have called it. It's the materialism of history, and it's something that doesn't demand. Now that you see this in the left, people can be religious and they're still historical materialists. They'll believe in God, but they believe, class struggles and motive force of history and all that. They don't bring any kind of supernatural belief into the ideas of history, class struggle, and revolution. And so in that sense, I don't see them as materialists. I don't know if that's what you were touching on, their views on that or not, but
yeah, I think you and they probably have a different idea of materialism. For them, it wouldn't have so much to do with political struggles or alienation or the human condition. It would have more to do with, if I can't measure it, let's assume it doesn't exist. It's Copenhagen interpretation. I can't measure it. I don't know what it is. That always struck me as at the heart of new atheism, which directly leads to where I really think there is a problem, and that's in the reductionism.
Lately I've seen this in their views on transgender folks. They're genetic reductionists. They go, well, exactly. X and Y chromosomes, and they don't see that there's gender as a psychosocial phenomena scientifically, and sex as a biological genetic phenomena. So obviously, a trans man, you would not have to treat with any genetic diseases that involve a Y chromosome. You're not going to just say, well, you're a man. You're going to treat you like you have a Y chromosome. Obviously not. But in a psychosocial sense, yeah, yes, you're a man. He, him, his. Those are your pronouns, and you will be interacted with as not as the person you were born in, not the sex you were born as, but this is your new gender. And then many societies have all had a great deal of toleration of this. I've been to Philippines, Laos, and Thailand, and all three of those societies have a long history of tolerating non-binary, queerness, transgender identities, and so many of the indigenous societies here have had toleration of that. It's got a long history, and then scientifically speaking, the American Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association believe in gender-affirming therapies, both surgery, drugs, whatever it takes. But you have these new atheists who they're anti-science kooks when it comes to that. They're going against psychiatric and psychological professionals.
Yeah, and that gets to your third.
That gets to the pseudoscience. Yeah, I'm jumping ahead there, but
we'll get to that. But I think this is a good time to transition to the scientism. Where you and I are in full agreement. I once saw a video of a debate between Dawkins and a Catholic clergyman. I believe he was a bishop, but I'm not certain of that. And Dawkins was defenseless, clueless, because the bishop rightly kept bringing things beyond the reductionist understanding, and Dawkins he was like a deer in the headlights. Had no idea how to respond to these things. Yet these are the things we live, in an analysis of DNA. We live in the real world with real human understandings and feelings, and Dawkins had no clue what he was talking about. And Dawkins also didn't understand that what he didn't have any clue of is what needs to be addressed once one turns atheist. I mean, I went through that myself. I became an atheist, and I still needed to understand the world beyond scientific reduction. That you can't live that way. Nobody can.
Yeah,
you start off with. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You had a question. Go ahead.
You start off with another comparison. The first is Marx, I believe, the fact that the secular basis, atheism, lifts off from itself and establishes itself in the clouds as an independent realm, can only be explained by the inner strife and intrinsic contradictoriness of the secular basis, which is alienation, versus atheism. The last stage of theism is a negative recognition of God. Care to comment on that?
Yeah. How many times have I promised myself that I'll no longer call myself an atheist or debate atheism, that I moved on? I want to be post-atheist. I want to go on. And you've said there's more important questions to in philosophy than whether God exists or not. That it's basically, it's settled. It's basically, I mean, I know this sounds arrogant, but basically the metaphysical arguments for God, they've been made. They were made 800 years ago by Aquinas, by even Rushdie or Averroes. And when I read Averroes, who Aquinas critiqued but also copied somewhat, I was reading, this is no different from what William Lane Craig would say. And it really hasn't changed in 800 years. And that's
no. Cling to the
this
long discredited arguments. No real philosopher of any standing still bothers with those questions. They're not important. I mean, they're fallacies. They're based on bad premises. They're not interesting anymore. They haven't been interesting for a couple hundred years.
And it's a stage nice to go to. I don't even know if I want to go any more through than I did with reading Averroes on that. If I read Aquinas, it's just maybe going to be more of the same. But Yeah, it's been debated, it's been talked about. And what's atrocious is that Dawkins hasn't even gone through the stage of considering these arguments and
No.
dismissing that he can, somebody like a David Bentley Hart or somebody like that. David Bentley Hart is an apologist I really respect.
Exactly.
He's got some crazy ideas, but he would just eat these folks for dinner. But
No
like,
question about it. Yeah, David Bentley Hart is somebody I could have an honest and interesting conversation with. Dawkins would put me to sleep.
yeah. And so we're ready to move on. We're ready to talk about other things in philosophy, but the new atheists they're trying to come to grips with, to them, it's like Bigfoot sightings, oh, it's just, God, Bigfoot, the tooth fairy. Is kind of like, no, stop,
Yeah,
that's not the debate.
in some ways, they're actually an embarrassment. Anybody who can't easily beat William Lane Craig in a debate is an embarrassment to us,
It is.
because it should be just the simplest thing. Sean Carroll did it. I mean, Sean Carroll just humiliated him. The others, it's embarrassing.
And then now that I'm dabbling into Kant, thanks to you recommending that, I'm realizing, well, this is it. It's an absurd question. A prime mover, the whole Aristotelian thing. Kant right there shows.
Right, first answer.
This is a nonsense question. It's like, why is there nothing? Why is there something instead of nothing? It's a question that we really can't answer. As much as we want to explore that question, it's nonsensical. We can't.
It's a nonsensical question. It is what he called transcendental illusion, and the whole question is an illusion. Comes from reason going beyond senses. Reason is properly used on sense. When you go beyond the sensible, reason no longer applies. It can't tell you anything, and it provides illusions that give you senseless questions that people argue about forever. And the first antinomy laid that out. It's just a senseless question, and really serious philosophers don't. It's not a question to them anymore.
Yeah, and
go to the Heideggerian direction, where the question even of a God is nonsensical. It's a metaphysical error. What we need to do is go back to being and discover the ground of the holy, which we haven't done a very good job of yet. And until we do that, we're stuck in Nietzsche's vertigo, as we've talked about before.
Yeah.
But you have to go back to the primary questioning of being. Jumping all of that, which is what the whole history in metaphysics it leads you to error and silliness. And it wasn't just Heidegger who said that. I mean, it's funny. Wittgenstein disavowed the entire 25 years of metaphysical philosophy as an error, and so did Alfred North. The funny thing is, those are two of the three founders of analytic philosophy. The third was Russell, and Russell never really saw the light, but the other two said this is stupid. And Wittgenstein actually said the only role of philosophers now is like flies out of the bottle. We've had 2,500 years of metaphysics asking wrong questions and getting silly answers and putting flies in the bottle. What we need to do is go back and fix the language back rather than these normative definitions of philosophy, which, just silliness. And the world can take care of itself. It doesn't need us philosophers to figure it out.
Yeah.
We just need to undo the damage at this point.
But anyway, getting back to Marx on that, reading the later works of Marx, he doesn't deal with so much the religious questions like that. He doesn't criticize religion as much. I'm working my way through Capital right now. I'm almost at the end of it, and it's interesting how he points out religion, religious society, and religious powers are just another cynical player in the whole pantheon of class society. On one hand, they're fighting for blue law. There's blue laws in London he talks about. There's one where the shops have to remain closed on Sundays, and how the churches are fighting for that. But the big capital wants to do it too, because they want to eliminate their smaller competition on a Sunday when people get paid on Saturday. they went to these small shops on Sunday and spent the stuff they needed then. The larger retailers could afford to close on Sunday and then wait till Monday and then get some of that business. So he talks about there, it was the bourgeoisie being very cynical about upholding the holiness of the Sunday. Then he points out in some areas where back then people would have a contract to work at a factory, and if you violated that, it was a criminal offense. And they could even make contracts for you to work on Sunday. So you could be fined for working in your garden on a Sunday, but if you didn't go to work on Sunday in your contract, you could be arrested. So he to him, it's just religion is one more, fool in the circus in a class society. And he quotes only the Bible. He quotes the Bible once in Capital, in the section on money. He quotes Apocalypse about the mark of the beast and the coming of the beast to talk about when money became something other than a super commodity, and when it became gold that, and I thought that was interesting. It's just a whole line, a bunch of lines from Revelation. So
yeah, as you know, I'm no Marxist myself, although I find him fascinating, and one of the things I refer back to again is your original quote at the top of your essay. It showed that he was a man with a heart. He wasn't a Stalinist. He was a man with a heart, with a real affection for humanity. And I disagree with the route he took. I fully respect the project he engaged on, which was to ameliorate that alienation and pain. I think that's really what drove him. You know Marx better than I do, though.
Yeah, he was a complicated figure. You don't want to meet your heroes. You probably met him. He said a lot of nasty things in his letters to Engels and all that. But he had an interesting life. He had a whole life there in London we probably don't know about. We have to read more in his letters, and his correspondence with Lincoln and Darwin and stuff like that make for interesting reading. Lincoln never wrote him back personally, but a friend of Lincoln did. But Marx, as much as he was steeped maybe in Hegel and Kant, he really, really, really was grounded in the British thinkers, Smith, Ricardo,
right.
And then the stories about him and Engels from 1859 after, when Origin of Species came out, it said that Marx and Engels could talk about nothing else for months after that, and that Marx himself attended Huxley's lectures in London. At least one of them, he attended a lecture on Darwin's idea, and he quotes Darwin. What he tried to do, and this is very hard to do because we want to avoid reductionism, is to bring economics into the scientific precision that Darwin did for biology. That Marx wanted to bring that level of scientific thought and analysis into economics, and I don't know if we can do that. But we can get in that direction. But there's a footnote in Capital where he mentions Darwin's idea about organs and specialization. He applies it to tools in the workshop, that tools are like organs. You have some tools that are have multiple uses and some tools that are very specialized. And he talks about the evolution of those tools and compares it to Marx. And that's all in the footnote.
Right.
And then I've been watching the companion commentary of Capital by David Harvey. It's David Harvey. I want to say Paul Harvey. That's the other guy. David Harvey, he's British, but he teaches at NYU. And his whole section on that part of Capital was just on that footnote. And it's section 8. And he talks about historical materialism. And anybody wants an introduction to Marx, they watch that one lecture by David Harvey on that one section, Capital, because Darwin was the other great British thinker that really influenced him in his ideas about capitalism and its development. So,
Yeah. You talk about meeting your heroes. I often wonder what would have happened had I had the opportunity. We're on the same wavelength, but I'm one of those hated Americans. I had briefly exchanged dialogue with his son, and I met Hans-Georg Gadamer when he was at Boston College. Gadamer was Heidegger's prize student who thought we'd get along just fine. But yeah, when it comes to economics, I think you know that I learned mine from Milton Friedman, which was a very different
that's a whole other that's a whole other show right there.
and that was he and Saul Bellow, which were my entrees into libertarianism, which I still am. But let's go back to those two quotes.
All right.
The two that I said, how do those? Why did you oppose those two, and what should we draw from that?
Oh, the going back to.
Yeah, going back to fact of the secular basis. While you're looking for that,
I
say that we have some questions here, and I want to get to these questions, but it's hard while we're having the discussion. I don't have any
this is
anything. So when we're done with this discussion, which is going to be fairly soon, we can then get to the question. Are you able to see the questions, Ron?
What where?
There's on the side of my screen are people who are watching asking questions.
Oh no, I don't have the no.
I'll read through them.
Do I have to push something to do that?
Like I said before, I'm not a technical guy. I'm a philosopher. It was agony just learning how to string together a basic video movie. I don't have a clue how this works.
Yeah, I can't see it's not like a YouTube page where I know what to push and get the questions popping up.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, y'all, if you have a question, but if you can see them,
I'll read them when we get to them.
Okay, but going back to those two quotes, that's one section I would really tighten up as I look back, and because I'm looking, what was I trying to say there? All I can remember is the last quote about the last stage of theism, is that I really want to move on. I think Marx did in his later writings. He moved on from philosophical stuff and focused in more on the British thinkers and economics and all that.
Right.
And that I want to find a term like post-atheist materialist or something like that and just move on. It's just the whole question of talking about God and theology to me is maybe would be something in an English class, or say it would be. I don't mean to demean it. It's English and poetry and all that stuff. As you know, that's a very fun, interesting stuff. But I just don't want to have to say that I'm an atheist anymore. It's just, it's just that the term has just become so poisoned and so. There's another word I'm looking for. It's been defiled.
Yeah,
it has been defiled.
As you said before, it's not even a question anymore. I mean, it'd be, I don't believe in witches. Nobody's going to argue about that. It just, let's move on. There are interesting questions. The existence of God isn't one of those. I get involved. I don't know. Frauds really bother me, and I can't help it.
Yeah, I mean, I like to entertain arguments for God. There's a lot of interesting. I'll listen to something that's interesting, but yeah, frauds and cheap shot arguments,
grifters. They trigger something in me, and I can't help it.
They come up with things like, you should be skeptical about your skepticism, and checkmate atheist, and just stop.
The way I would sum up the scientism part is that they don't offer an answer. As you said, they're a negative. God doesn't exist. Okay, yeah, that's good, but what does? Um,
Yeah.
what, how do we get out of the Nietzschean vertigo? How do we reconnect to more authentic values? That's what counts. And I don't have a clue that that's a question. Um,
Yeah.
is the problem. You
Corey
have
Muller's.
people, you have them like trying to say, well, we can rationally devise morals. No, you can't. You know, Kant thought it didn't work out too well. You can't. That's not how morals come about. Um, that was Harris who tried that. Uh, you have Dawkins who totally befuddled when you bring up spiritual matters or matters of being a human being, and that's the important stuff. And
Yeah.
they can't even conceive of the question, which makes me just kind of move on.
Right. Well, that I keep going back to that cartoon by Corey Moeller in Existential Comics about scientism and his critique of logical. Well, he critiques logical positivism in that cartoon, but you know which one I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. The Philosophy Force 5.
I had no idea what that was. No.
I'll have to send you that where Hannah Arendt and Mary Wollstonecraft and a few other women philosophers defending the honor of philosophy against the scientists Harris and Dawkins. And anyway, I'll send it to you. It's funny stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Please. Um, let's just quickly then. We saw how idealism kind of led to the reductionism, and reductionism leads to pseudoscience. So why don't you kind of recap for us what you were thinking there?
I touched on something earlier that I didn't bring up in my article, their new area of pseudoscience, but that's in their genetic reductionism about transgender folks. And then the latest hubbub was Dawkins getting his Humanist of the Year award was pulled from him. And, and I've seen a lot of atheists do that. They're just like, oh, it's genetics. And like, do you guys know what the psychiatrist, does that even matter to you guys? What the professional scientists and medical experts are saying about transgender folks?
Right.
And then also the viewpoints about mental illness. I put in quotes in there about equating religious belief with mental illness. And it's like, do you know of any mental health professionals that have rung the bell on this yet? Is there any evidence that all these treatments stop people from being religion? Of all these, we have this whole body of evidence that from science that it's not a mental illness. Now it can be manifested through mental illness. I've had people in my family who are mentally ill, and they would hear demons. But the more modern thinking people in my family suffered mentally ill, it wasn't demons, it was government agents putting spy devices in them. The delusions that you get kind of depend upon your cultural context. So if you're in a religious cultural context, there's a lot of delusions about demons and God and Jesus talking to you, but to others it's aliens and government agents and things like that. So to correlate, that's just one example. You just really can't correlate religious beliefs or things like that in mental illness with religion per se. It's just absolutely unscientific.
Right. I agree. And coming back from a Heideggerian perspective, the question of genes, do these guys really think they know what genes are? They're not codes. They're not just simply, there's intention behind those genes. What does that really mean? It's a question they couldn't fathom. So do you have we have a lot of questions here. Would you like to sum up or what would you like to say?
Just that, this has been a long process. My views of Marx and Marxian economics and Marxian history very much changed when I first read the Communist Manifesto in 1966. It was a different world back then.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and back then we thought there was a great tide of liberation and this and that, and people were coming to Marx. Now I look at the young folks coming up, they're going to anarchism. They're going to Kropotkin and Ursula Le Guin and what's his name, who wrote The Spanish Anarchist, who escapes me. They're going more towards anarchism. It's still there. It's just everything's in play now. So anyway, I could talk more about Marx in a different show if you want.
Sure. All right, let's. I'm going to read through some of the questions. Some of them are more for you. Some of them might be more for me. I'm going to start with. I'm just going to go through these in order. Three Rusty Nails, who's somebody I know from Twitter.
Oh yeah.
He you know, I think he had the impression that I totally denounce logic, which isn't true. Logic has its place. It's a practical sort of mental apparatus.
That's what the antinomies are all about.
Exactly.
It's all about logic.
Yeah, he has. So I said, logic has its place, and he goes, "What's it good for?" And I said, "Practical analysis of the sensible world." And later, we'll get to that. He goes, "What is the difference between idealism and realism?" What would you say to that, Ron?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm going to say I don't know. I know realism only in the artistic
right.
sense, and I don't know it. I know there's a whole thing about moral realism and moral philosophy, and I want to know more about it.
Okay, idealism is a metaphysical approach that says that on a noumenal level, things exist in their ideal situation, kind of like Platonic idealism. Kant had a kind of idealism also, but very, very different. Reason was his idealism. Reason is will, and will comes from God, and that's how that we can know things about the world. But it's basically a metaphysical a priori existence of which we try to understand. Sometimes it involves a consciousness. Next week when we talk with Craig Reed, he's going to talk about idealism as a cosmic consciousness, basically it's metaphysical. Then Raphael asks, "Too late for the gods. What about the old atheists? Some of them heard are lifelong atheists, usually ex-Christians. We do see some things differently than formerly superstitious folks." Well, that would be you and I. We are almost lifelong atheists.
Yeah.
We've been around a long, long time, well before new atheism.
Yeah, my mom took me to Methodist Sunday school when I was 10 and younger, and it wasn't a bad experience. It was stories about Jesus and good stories, and then I just never believed. I never prayed. Once I stopped believing in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, I didn't believe in anything supernatural. So
I had an odd sort of coincidence. I was raised a Missouri Synod Lutheran, which is very odd for a guy who's English on both sides, but I was. And I was confirmed by Martin Marty, who later, a couple of years later, he retired from the church, went to the University of Chicago Divinity School, and became a world-class scholar. And he's the man who taught me history, religion, and ancient Near Eastern religion. So it was a strange thing. But yeah, I look back on my religious days with some darkness. Renouncing that was the most liberating experience of my life. I rid myself of the artificial paranoia of thinking somebody knew every one of my thoughts and was judging them. I rid myself of all the dissonance, the cognitive dissonance created between what I knew in the world and what I was supposed to believe, and they didn't hold any longer. And just that whole thing, it was kind of like like the loosing of the strong force in the nucleus, just like that, and it was all of that pressure was gone.
Yeah, your experience isn't different. Usually you hear about the very painful separations as people have a very horrible separation from religion
Yeah,
and
mine
go
wasn't.
through a lot of pain. But I have a friend here in town who realized there was no God, and whew, that was the reaction. You can
Right.
relax now.
He has between people who were lifelong atheists, usually ex-Christians, that's us. But I also have two adult sons who were brought up with no religion at all. And to them, it's not even a thought. I mean, they both went to they went to prep schools, New England prep schools, and these schools started out religious. They're not now, but there are chapels and people who went, and they kind of it was just sort of an oddity to them, nothing of any interest. They don't even entertain the possibility of religion. I don't know if we answered your question there, Raphael. If not, ask it again. I think this is for you. When you talk about new atheists, you talk about they're lacking logic. That is their problem. But you guys cannot start. I'm not sure what that's getting at. That's from Three Rusty Nails.
Okay, repeat that. You did break out a little bit on it. Did you say Sartre, the philosopher, or is that?
Yeah. When you talk about new atheists, you talk about their lacking logic. That is their problem. But you guys cannot discount Sartre. Three Rusty Nails. Can you rephrase that question a bit?
Yeah.
I don't know how to go about that.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say they lack logic.
No,
in what sense? In the narrow sense that some people want to put everything into a formula type of logic, or the logic like how Kant uses it as an antinomies. Those are two different kinds of logic to me that have to be clarified. But I need to know more about the existentialists. There's a great Facebook page of existentialists that I haven't invited you to yet, but.
I wrote something for Eccles in the blog, showing the difference between Sartre and
I read that. Yes,
Heidegger.
that was good.
I tried to get at that a little bit.
I have to catch up with the rest of your blog. You got more questions there?
Yeah, Raphael asks or says, well, we are all Marxist. We may disagree with his conclusions, but you can't dispute his analysis of economics or economies. I would, but Ron, you want to?
Yeah, I when I read Capital, and it's amazing what you see today. The things he describes back then, like outsourcing and wage theft, and all these little things that are still happening today. It's that shocks me. There's some things that might be dated, but I think what happened in China is a really good lesson. You had what Mao did was a ham-fisted, idealistic attempt to build a dynasty around him. He started out good fighting the Japanese, and he stole all his ideas from Lao Tzu and Sun Tzu, and didn't credit him, and then used them in his guerrilla warfare and his dialectical analysis, which was not the same as Marx's. And then he failed. But then you had the leadership in China say, well, we need to develop the economy. And they realized if you're a semi-feudal society, you can't build socialism. You basically use capitalism. And the greatest mass migration in human history were the Chinese peasants who left the countryside to go to work in the factories since 1980. We see the effect of that every day. And within my reach here is something made by those people who left the countryside. I could probably grab any item here, and it was made by them. That's shaken the world. And it is the largest expansion of the Industrial Revolution in world history, as well as the biggest migration in world history. What Engels and Marx saw, what Engels saw in Manchester in his factory, it was just tiny compared to what happened with China. And so China has now, we're watching right before our eyes it happening again. And it's ironic that Marxist students are disappearing and getting arrested in China because they want to stand up for the rights of their professors and janitorial staff on the university. The irony.
Yeah.
I see capitalism is developing. Capitalism is the one that's destroying religion and family values, like it did back in the Industrial Revolution. When you work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, you don't have time for home and family and church and all the stuff that the moral religious people talk about. It was capitalism that came and took a hammer to that and beat it to smithereens. And I think we're still seeing that today. And the religious fanaticism is trying to cling on. They're just trying so hard to cling on. But the advent of scientific revolutions and capitalism and technology is beating them. No Marxists needed, no atheists needed. It's an inexorable force in history. We don't, we just have to. Give me the popcorn. Let's watch this. So I think he's being validated in very key economic ways.
Yeah, I had kind of I had an interesting perspective. In the late 70s, I was in Berlin for a few years, and I saw at least Soviet-style communism close up in person.
You went to the East a few times?
More than a few.
The
first thing that became obvious to me is that Soviet communism cannot produce value. It couldn't. It had no clue how to produce value, which, it's kind of tough to survive if you can't do that. And second, it was so, the oppressiveness was so thick you could feel it, and the fear of the people. It was
the Stasi, yeah.
Or the Stasi. My goodness. Yeah. I will always have this. Potsdam is just outside of Berlin, and I was there once at 6:30 in the morning, and I saw people trudging to work. They all had the same work uniforms. I don't know what factories they were going to, but it was the most depressing thing I've ever seen. It was still, it wasn't, the sun hadn't come up yet. It was somewhat dark, and it just trudging down these old streets. I thought, this is horrible. This is truly a horrible thing. Well, I could tell you stories about Stasi that would, it would make your skin crawl.
Yeah, there's a lot of the people talk about that now. I remember what's her name, Katarina Witt, talking about that.
Oh yeah,
back.
Yeah.
And in 1987 I went to Helsinki, and then I went to then Leningrad, and then Novgorod and Moscow. And it was clear to me that a developed Nordic model form of capitalism provided a better standard of living than what I saw in the Soviet Union, and again, Finland. It was like, I want to live in Finland. We could see that type of capitalism. This is what we're trying to fight for now. This is the whole idea of the Green New Deal. We want a Nordic model style of capitalism before we can get to socialism. That's what we're fighting for, and they call it socialism, and it's not. Agreed, but they call it socialism when we fight for it, but when we show how good it is in the Nordic countries, they go, "That's not socialism." Okay, well.
No, but you have to have. Well, like I said, I learned my economics from Milton Friedman, but one of the things he impressed upon me, and it's true. I mean, experience is without a price mechanism, you have no idea what to produce or how much. And if you don't have that, you cannot produce value. And that is the reason that communism failed, is you have to have a price mechanism. If you don't have the feedback of the price mechanism, nothing is going to work. There's another question. It's actually a comment again from Raphael. I think it's for you. I'm going to let you have it anyway.
Okay.
2 fun facts. Almost everyone misinterprets the invisible hand. True.
They
And
do.
second,
True.
Smith and Jefferson both believed in a 100% death tax on the states to be evenly distributed among the community.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so against inherit. Obviously some people need to inherit some money, but yeah, that for people to be born on third base and think they hit a triple has just got to go. That's just ridiculous. Obviously you're not going to leave people bereft. You're going to let them keep something. But Elon Musk, no, he dies. That I believe the labor theory of value. He didn't work to that. You can talk all about risk that you want, but his kids can't be born on third base. The invisible hand. This is what I learned by giving up the old Stalinist study guides in the 70s. The party, the Communist Party, and the International had these study guides approved for capital, and you look back on them and what cheap rank. It's just like, what? This is not. No, Marx, he's well grounded in the classics of Smith and Ricardo. The invisible hand wasn't necessarily a moral invisible hand. Marx took the invisible hand. He didn't take so much the moral aspects of it. What he took from it is that equal exchanges for equal on the market in the long run, not in the immediate run. Things will go up above and below their value is based on socially necessary labor time. But the invisible hand basically makes it that the commodity money commodity formula, things that basically level out and exchange at equal values. And that he took that aspect of the invisible hand from Smith, and it was very, very critical to his formulation because he determined the value of labor based on that. Not the value labor creates, but the value of labor. And yeah, I learned a lot more better things about Adam Smith from Karl Marx than anybody. It's like, if you want to get a good impression of Adam Smith, read Karl Marx, but don't, a favorite way to troll people on the internet is like the Colette Ritus is to get an Adam Smith quote and put it on a picture of AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and just watch the hate comments about she doesn't know what she's talking about. Adam Smith said that, guys.
AOC is so interesting. On economic policy, I disagree with her on most things, but I'm struck by intelligence. She is brilliant, and she's her degree from a good school is in economics. She knows what she's talking about. I have the greatest respect for her. It's hard to believe I was once a Republican.
Yeah, well, you are. I know a lot of former Republicans, and
2016 changed that.
Yeah.
I think the next two are for me, and they're fairly easy ones from Raphael. First one, can you link Ron's article in the chat? I will put that in the comments when we're done here. I will definitely do that. I should have before.
And I'll come back afterwards on the after it's recorded and try to answer questions there in the chat
and the second comes to me from Catholic Traditionalist. Are you an atheist? Yes, but a very unconventional one. If you watch the live stream next week with Craig Reed, you'll see that I'm not your average atheist.
No, you're not. You when you bring the German critical philosophy the way you do to it, and it's a whole new ball game.
I'm very Heideggerian. Heidegger was interesting. He started out studying, became an atheist, but never gave up the theological questions. And in my graduate studies, I did some work with who is a Christian philosopher. And he talked about, he taught only a quarter a year. Chicago, spent the rest of the time in France and I think Switzerland. But he said that European theologians took Nietzsche and Heidegger very, very seriously, as do I, because they asked the same questions as theologians ask. They just look for the answers in a different place. We deny metaphysics and look for the answers in the essence of being here. I mean, the physical reality, that's what we have in which to inquire, including our own essence. I look for the same answers. I just don't look for them in a religion or anything physical.
I could read the Madman parable again and again and again. That's just one of the
Isn't that
greatest works of
amazing?
art.
Okay, Raphael has given us his thanks and had to leave. And I think that's it for the questions. Ron, I am so thrilled that you were able to do this. I hope you can do it again another time.
Yes.
Maybe you can ask me a question. Put me on the spot.
Yeah, well, I would love to do that. I would love to, I've spent most of my life, early in my life, besides Marx, reading Chinese philosophy, and now I've read a few Zen works of Zen and stuff like that. But I want to delve into, Kant, Nietzsche, and Heidegger more. And
I may have sent you the link on YouTube. There's a video of a conversation Heidegger had with a Buddhist monk.
Yes, yeah. I didn't get all the way through that. I have to get back to that. It's in my queue in YouTube. You did send me that, and I have to catch up with that. I have to catch up with a few more of your videos too. I saw both of the ones with Inspiring Christianity, and I've seen a few others. And yeah, I would like have a show where I could ask you some pointed questions. And just to give you what comes up all the time when I talk about the three German philosophers is we'll get to the grill in the room about him is Heidegger's relationship with the Nazis. That comes
up. It's there, can't deny it.
And we have to put that to bed maybe, and then go on and discuss his philosophy. I don't want to ignore it.
Heidegger's son, I don't know if I believe it, but he had an interesting take. He said his father really had no interest in politics. It was his mother who was really the enthusiast in the family. Heidegger was just trying to do his philosophy. Having said that, he wrote some disturbing things in that time. So I try not to underplay it. Yeah, he joined the Nazis. He also got thrown. I mean, he also lost his rectorship, and because he wasn't fully supportive of the Nazis, and from that day on until the end of the war, there was a monitor sitting in every one of his lectures. So it wasn't as cozy a relationship with the Nazis as some people make it out to be.
Yeah. Same could be said with Heidegger. I'm not Heidegger. Heisenberg. Some people say that he dragged his feet. And
Heisenberg, that's another whole story. He collaborated. He did.
He did collaborate. Yeah. And then there's Conrad Lorenz.
He tried to say he didn't to hide his utter failure. He wasn't able to do what the Americans were able to do, and Einstein they didn't. Heisenberg is a strange character. He's not fully honorable, but
I wondered about that.
Made some important contributions. I mean, there's really Niels Bohr who did it all, and Schrödinger, but Heisenberg made his contribution, but we shouldn't overestimate his importance.
So we can clear the air about that, and also same with the Zen masters who were in Japan during the war, and
exactly same thing.
And the founder of several modern martial arts helped train police during that we train at their dojos today. So anyway, just something to clear the air about.
Yeah, sure. We should do that. I want to do more of these kinds of things. Like you said, I had Kyle Alander on. I think he's an absolutely brilliant guy.
Yes, a
he's
smart
not a
kid.
conventional Christian in the same way I'm not a conventional atheist. And up until you get to cosmic consciousness, I agree on a whole lot. I really enjoyed my conversations with him. I'm so much looking forward to the conversation with Craig Reed. If there are people out there who want to discuss these things, let me know, because this is, we're going to do a bunch more. Anyway, thank you, Ron. I've
Thank
kept
you,
you for
Jeffrey.
an hour. I didn't mean to do that. I'm so sorry.
It's all right.
But I am thrilled you were able to make it, and we'll see you again soon.
All right. Let's do this
All right.
again.
You bet. Thanks.
All right. Goodbye.